Have you ever wondered if you can be offering a faster, less buggy application experience for your customers? With Raygun Application Performance Monitoring, you have all the information you need at your fingertips to find and fix errors and performance problems across your tech stack down to the line of code. Raygun makes it easy to monitor the impact of your performance improvements, quickly identify and resolve issues, and see how your code performs in the hands of your customers, saving you time, money, and sanity. I've personally used Raygun on my iOS apps, and when a user hits a crash, those crashes get centralized into one location. They get bucketed automatically. I'll get a call stack and an email with a line number where things were crashing. It felt to me that I got a gift for my customer in the form of a bug report that I could actually solve. Head over to raygun.com and try it out for yourself. That's RAYGUN.com for a free 14-day trial. Scott Hanselman, and it's another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today, I'm talking with April Curley. She's a diversity specialist and educator, former social studies teacher, and recently left Google, doing work there as a diversity recruiter. How are you?
I am well. Thank you. How are you?
How is anyone right now, right? I enjoy talking to people on the podcast, but I would much rather have the podcast be live at a conference where we could sit there and pass the mic back and forth. Yeah. That would feel great.
Someday soon. For sure.
Someday soon. But until then, one of the things that I'm interested in understanding is I don't think that people know what a recruiter does. Mm-hmm. I think that the average person right now in 2020, they put their resume on LinkedIn. They do the best they can to have a good GitHub, and it should be green. Like they have all these ideas, these myths of a recruiter. And then they also feel that there's a lot of nepotism. It's just like, oh, it's who you know. And you know, while one person's throwing their resumes at a recruiter who is the gatekeeper of the big company, then there's other people that just slide in because they know someone. Can you help me understand what the job of a recruiter is?
Yeah, sure. So, and this is obviously going to look very different across sector, across company, depending on if it's a huge company or if it's like a startup. That hat of the recruiter is going to mean a lot of different things. For me, working for a large tech company like Google, I had a very specific role of increasing technical applications for Google's bread and butter roles, so software engineering, SRE roles. So my job was specifically to find really talented, qualified candidates, particularly at historically Black colleges and universities, and prepare them and get them ready for the interview process at Google, which is pretty difficult, and make sure that they had a good experience in that process. And so at some companies, there are other components to that role, which include being a screener and a sourcer. And that pretty much just means you're doing the extra legwork of finding candidates through online portals or connecting with universities and tapping into their career services departments and trying to find really skilled candidates to fill roles. But my role was really just to be in person and on campus. I pretty much lived on campus 24/7 with students and just going to find the really top qualified candidates at these particular universities and working with them to make sure that they fared well or fared successfully in Google's process.
So working with them doesn't mean teaching to the test, but it's just prep, because for some people it might be intuitive what a big tech interview looks like. And for someone else, they're walking into a room they've never been in.
That's exactly it. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Making sure that, in some cases, I would host events on campus that I knew would really prepare students to interview strongly. So bringing Google engineers to campus and doing mock interviews, practice interviews, anything that we would advise any student that's interested in working for a big tech company, they should be practicing, what a technical interview looks like using a whiteboard. And so I would host events that would allow students to get some of that practice in before going into interviews. And then dozens of other events that are sort of aligned with that responsibility.
Mm-hmm. at some point we need to make sure we come back to that conversation about whiteboarding. But when a well-meaning but like kind of regular average, let's just say a regular Scott Hanselman, right, a regular mid-40s white engineer from the Midwest puts a job description up that they wrote in a couple of minutes, and then they put it up on a website, and then they're welcome to hire anyone. They're excited to hire anyone, but then they only get 10 other people that look like them. And they say, gosh, I don't know what I can do. It's like no women applied, no people of color applied. What is it about that process of like, hey, I put the job out there, everyone's open. What's wrong with that thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I love that question because a lot of my job was to literally just break down barriers of imposter syndrome and encourage students to take advantage of opportunities that were in front of them. So many of my students that I worked with were, very, I guess, they were insecure and not confident in their ability to pursue roles in tech, and particularly roles at a big tech company such as Google. And so I say it's a matter of breaking down those barriers and those myths of what it means to be in tech and what it means to work in tech, the skill set that's required. Like, let's, try to remove some of that fear for students so that they know, like, yes, if you are qualified for this role, you should 100% apply to this role. I think the second piece is where, are you marketing this role? How are you making sure that this role reaches the corners of the earth where talent exists? And getting a really good grasp on how to find spaces and communities that do foster healthy environments for underrepresented people in tech, including women, including Black people, including brown people. And so, I would question those two pieces first.
We hear that word underrepresented a lot, but I heard my good friend Brian Lyles say, well, maybe it's not that I'm underrepresented, maybe that it's you're overrepresented. So I've been starting to think of myself as an overrepresented person. And in inverting that, it makes me think about, so in America, and I know that for folks who are listening to the podcast, they're largely, many of them are overseas. America has a complicated relationship with race and certainly complicated ways to express that. But just to put it in simple factual numbers, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, people in engineering roles in tech that are Black are usually between 1.5% to 2%, but they represent 13% of the United States. When we say we want more representation in tech, if 13% of people in tech were Black, would that be a representative thing? Would that be not success, but at least be a moment for us to be happy, excited?
I mean, yes and no. I don't think that we should strive for, a cookie cutter, like micro version of what our country looks like. And that has to be the makeup of tech. I think each industry is going to look a little different with numbers, just depending on the industry and I think a myriad of other factors. But I think that would be a good start. Let's strive to be inclusive in a way that builds better products for a diverse group of users. And B, because let's not pretend tech is driven by the dollar in most cases. Like, let's figure out a way to drive the bottom line and connect those two pieces by, understanding the data around, if you have more diverse teams, then you're going to see a stronger bottom line in revenue. And so there is a return on the investment. I think that we just need to build a better case for the data around what that looks like and what it means to have diverse teams making better products and pouring more money into your organization as a result.
Yeah, the data does show that diverse teams, and the inverse or the opposite of that would be homogenous teams, right? Homogenous teams create homogenous products that inadvertently exclude people. And if the goal is that you want to make more money and you want to make your audience as big as possible, making sure that your product isn't deliberately or accidentally exclusionary is the goal, right?
That's right.
And theoretically, if a bunch of people like me if I just do all the facial recognition testing on my face, then it will work with the set of all people who are Scott.
Right. That's right. And I want to be very clear because I get really excited about this. I think that the conversation should always focus on what it means to have diversity, because while I am a strong advocate of having more Black and Brown folks in spaces because that's the community that I show up for, I also, come from a family of veterans. I come from a family that identifies as low income. I come from a family that, my mom was a high school dropout, but seemingly made a way for herself and for my siblings and I. And so even just thinking about geographic diversity, those components for me are so, so, so important because I am a part of those spaces that they contribute to the thoughtful creation and innovation of products that we're building for, like I said, diverse users. So I want to talk about this in a way that also encompasses those factors because I don't think that it gets enough attention. Again, also thinking about women's colleges or tribal colleges, Hispanic serving institutions. Like there are just so many spaces and communities that I believe contribute to this inclusive process, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that there are people both in and outside of America who are feeling like the world is split in half right now. Mm-hmm. And some people may have made it this far into the podcast and they may say, gosh, those Americans are always making it about black and white. But really, it's about inclusion is what I'm hearing you say.
That's right.
And you're acknowledging that one's identity isn't always skin color. Like,
that's right.
I love that you brought up veterans, right? Mm-hmm. One of my colleagues effectively, like on paper, looks exactly like me, but spent 9 years in a nuclear submarine. And that's a totally different experience than I had. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of thinking I want on my team. Mm-hmm. But then here's the question for you then. Mm-hmm. Why is the term diversity of thought not a term that we like to hear when it could theoretically describe what you just said? Like we want to have diversity of all kinds, background, geographic, language, all those things.
That's a really good question. I don't know if it's a matter of semantics or if, folks on both sides of the aisle just want to remain so, I guess, focused on the things about themselves that feel important. And therefore you want to prioritize that in conversation. And I understand that train of thought. It took me a little while to be proud and confident of all of the pieces that make up my identity. And then furthermore, want to advocate for those pieces of my identity. But it didn't start that way. I think I was very much wrapped up into like, how can I do right by Black and Brown people? Because that was the community that, for me was the most evident and showed up the most in spaces. People can identify that the most when they see me. But eventually I grew, particularly at Google, into someone who was able to see the benefit of all of the different kinds of Googlers that I worked with and where they came from and their stories and their family makeup. And these were people who didn't look like me necessarily, but just had such rich background. And I, for me, started to understand like how that was 100% beneficial and made our company 100% better because of having so many different folks with different perspectives and different insight and different skill sets. And so I don't know the answer to why we're afraid of using that language. I think we can come up with a different way to say it, but diversity of thought, sure, like folks don't like that, but I think that it is 100% a reflection of the folks who come from different backgrounds. You're going to see diversity of thought from anybody, but more importantly, from folks who, in so many ways have been underrepresented in any and every sector that we talk about. I'm sure I'm rambling and I don't know if any of that made sense. But
I think that does make sense. And let me see if I can crystallize it. And you tell me, it's I will say that it does make me feel good when I'm interviewing a guest and they say, that's a good question. Hopefully that's not just an affectation. It means that I have my 57 tabs that I have open and the research that I've been doing is not for no reason, which is awesome. So thank you for that. Here's a question then. Let's take the concept of diversity of thought and the discussion that we've been having around inclusion as it relates to your job previously as a diversity recruiter at mostly HBCUs. If I hire people that I know, people from my peer group, I might inadvertently hire, let's say, people from Portland Community College. And the next thing I know, without even thinking about it, I have a team could be a diverse team, but they all came from the same school. Why do schools have flavors or textures that then we all get a sense of like, oh, the kids from MIT, they're pretty sharp, and Caltech, they're good stuff. And, Oregon State, less so, and I say that as someone in Oregon.
Yeah. So I think if I understand your question, and make sure you probe or follow up if I didn't hit it just right. But, there's a saying at Google and so many other places that great people know great people. And what that essentially means is, if a company has invested in hiring you, bringing you onto the team, into the space, they're expecting that you're going to show up and that you're going to perform and you're going to, do exactly what it is that they hired you to do. But furthermore, that you're going to know folks who are just as highly motivated and a strong critical thinker, a strong problem solver. They're going to expect that you surround yourself with those folks. And so the saying is great people know great people, because they expect that you're going to then refer those folks into the company. And so when we look at that at a micro level, what that means is exactly what you're saying. People based off of the school you went to, the community you grew up in, the life that you're building for yourself. The spaces that you insert yourself in are the folks who are normally similar to you. And that's who you're going to want to work alongside. I think in most cases, folks are not intentional about doing that, right? It's not, let me go recruit all of my JHU, Johns Hopkins University buddies, because I know that they are so brilliant and so creative and innovative because I went to that school and I am that way, right? I don't think that that's intentional, but it is where I have a lot of my friends, and I'm still very tapped into their alumni base. And so I still live in Baltimore. So I am inherently going to tap into those networks because it just makes sense for the spaces that I've been in for 33 years at this point. So it's not intentional. And I don't think that we should be hard on folks who have that mentality or even behave in those ways. I think that we should just begin to challenge that thought process. And I say this selfishly, me challenging myself in how I am advocating for communities that are not necessarily like me or that don't look like me, and thinking about it in that lens. And so I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that's the way that I think about it for sure. It's not intentional that folks do that. It's natural. It's inherent. It's what we do.
Well, and that's the essence of when we hear the term unconscious bias. Right. If it was conscious bias, it wouldn't be bias, then it'd be a whole other thing.
Yep.
So unconsciously you do that. And one of the things that I think is helpful for those who are listening, who may, be white folks like myself or men of a certain age, they might go, well, gosh, April is saying that she too has unconscious biases, both for and against.
Yep.
That may be obvious to many who are listening, but that may also be not obvious. It's wow, okay. We all it's okay to say, yeah, I really like people from my school and I enjoyed my college come up. I want to hire people from there. But that may also be meaning that we're not exploiting or tapping into other great universities and systems, like, for example, here in the U.S., the Historically Black College and University Network. What are HBCUs, and why should folks that haven't gone to them or don't know what they are care?
Yeah. So historically Black colleges are universities within the United States. There's one in the Virgin Islands, but outside of that one, they are all here in the United States, and they exist as a way to allow Black and brown students, and I'll get back to this in a second. Actually, anybody can go to an HBCU, but the space was created initially to allow Black and brown students to further their education past, K-12. Right. Because there was a time, historically, that's the historically piece. There was a time when Black and brown people could not go to university post, high school. And so these spaces were created with that intention. Currently, anybody can choose to attend an HBCU. In fact, if you do not identify as being Black or African American, in some cases, HBCUs will offer scholarships to folks who are not within that subset. And so I love HBCUs because I think that it does give incredible insight into, Black and brown spaces and communities that are creating really strong contributors to our society, to our world, for that matter. I don't know if you have data on hand, but I want to say over 2/3 of the computer science degrees that are awarded to Black people are coming from historically Black colleges and universities. And so that's a huge number to ignore when we're thinking about like where talent exists. And so I love HBCUs because it does provide, a space for Black and brown students, and any student for that matter, to really learn about who they are, and to figure out the talents that they have within themselves, and then cultivate that talent in a way that's protected and embraced, and then be able to go out into the world and contribute thoughtfully to humanity. And so I love HBCUs. I think anybody will speak about their college in that way. I would hope anybody would speak about their college in that way. But in my 10 years of working with HBCUs, I have come to learn that that's sort of the essence of what it means to participate in any space that's a historically Black college or university, whether you're Black, white, an international student, or, anything in between. And so to me, that's what I've learned. I was not an HBCU grad. I want to be very clear. My degrees are from McDaniel College and Johns Hopkins University, but I am a proud advocate of HBCUs. And that's been sort of where my work has been rooted over the last decade.
Whether you're working on a personal project or managing enterprise infrastructure, you deserve simple, affordable, and accessible cloud computing solutions that allow you to take your project to the next level. Simplify your cloud infrastructure with Linode's Linux virtual machines and develop, deploy, and scale your modern applications faster and easier. Get started on Linode today with a $100 free credit for listeners of Hansel Minutes. You can find all the details at linode.com/Hansel Minutes. That's linode.com/Hansel Minutes. Linode has 11 global data centers and provides 24/7, 365 human support, with no tiers or handoffs regardless of your plan size. In addition to shared and dedicated compute instances, you can use your $100 in credit on S3-compatible object storage, managed Kubernetes, and more. Visit linode.com/Hansel Minutes and click on the free account button to get started. So it makes a lot of sense that your job was to increase the incoming pipeline, right? Mm-hmm. Like if we go back to my example of, well-meaning white manager puts out a resume, gets 10 qualified white applicants, and wishes that they had a more diverse pool from which to choose a qualified applicant. Mm-hmm. They then go to their recruiter and they say, hey, I'd really like it if I had 30 great people from all over that is a representative match. Then it makes sense for you to go to an HBCU. And to the points of the statistics that you pointed out, there's about 75,000 computer science degrees that come every year, awarded every year. About 8% of them go to African-American students. Mm-hmm. But of those degrees, 25% of them to African-American students came from HBCUs. So that's a pretty exciting number. And then a lot of folks like myself who have been in America their whole lives may not realize that there's 107 historically Black colleges and universities, many of which with a very well thought of computer science programs. That seems like that's a place for us to go looking for talent.
Yeah, I this isn't a secret. Like, there are really strong computer science departments that exist at historically Black colleges. There are really strong faculty and students and graduate students that make up these spaces that, like I said, I've been working with for the last 10 years. And I can 100% say that, the students that I worked with are some of the most clever, innovative, creative brains on the planet, honestly. And so, these are spaces that have existed for so many years. And so I want us to start looking at them with the same regard and respect as we do other schools that are producing top talent and pushing them into tech, because it's not a secret anymore. Like, that talent exists at these schools. And I would love to see more engagement in folks, setting their eyes upon those universities when it comes to diversifying their tech pipeline, for sure, or any pipeline for that matter.
Okay, so then I hire some talent and I bring them into the company, and maybe they're the first, maybe they're the second, and the psychic weight of being the first is non-trivial. We've seen that in all of the first. It's hard to be the first.
Yeah.
And then they leave. They leave the company. Maybe they leave tech. How do I go from 0 to representative?
Yeah.
Well, I have to get through a time, an uncomfortable time, but a time nonetheless, where there's 1, there's 2, where someone's alone. How do I make a welcoming space when you're the first of anything?
That's a great question. I
think it's a hard question for you because I know that your job is to get them in the door. Keeping them is my job, right?
Yes and no. I think, I spent a good amount of my time at Google thinking about that very question, and beyond thinking about it, actually working internally to make sure that spaces were welcoming and spaces that felt protective and embracing for the students that I had the opportunity and pleasure to work with and ultimately bring into the company. I think there are a lot of companies that do it, that get it right and do a good job. And then there are some companies that need a lot of work, but I think the thread that sort of, exists in all of those things would be just a place that operates within the principles of respect and humility. I think I really loved, one of the reasons I joined Google is because they had a model that said, don't be evil. And so the company's done away with that now. But I think for me as a Black woman, as a Black queer woman coming into a company that had a very clear direction of, we are not going to be an evil company, that for me, that language in and of itself is important. And I think so many Googlers loved that language being used because it was direct. And it was a very clear statement of like, we are a company that prides ourselves on doing the right thing. The language is no longer used. And so I think when you shift in that way, it does 100% impact how folks feel about being in that company or existing in that company. And so I would challenge or charge even folks to think about the way that they're talking about, the principles of respect, humility, integrity, love even. And I'm not a preacher, but I think that those qualities for me are the things that I try to do and show up for and implement on a daily basis for the students that I was bringing into Google that I knew would have a hard time because this was their first internship or first experience with a top tech company, and B, for the teams that they were going to go on. This was the team's first time of having either an HBCU grad in their space or even a Black student in their space. And so trying to bridge the gap so that both parties knew what to expect and that they had a good experience. I did that on a daily basis, but it was exhausting and I experienced burnout because I felt like I was one of very few people who tried to create safe spaces for underrepresented folks at the company.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I want to call out, and I think this is important because there's language that you're using, the specific words that you're using that maybe some of the folks that have listened to the show may not hear a lot, and or they may hear it and they may think of it as being a triggering word for them, like the term spaces. When we hear that word spaces, I'm hearing meetings, project teams, all hands. Anytime an event of any kind
that's right.
comes together, that's a space. And that's what we mean, right? When we say spaces?
You've got it. That's exactly it. Yep.
Okay. And some of those may be welcoming spaces like, I love my team, but the all hands feels awkward. Or, the team is great, but when I go to the morale events, they're having a bikini party and I wear a hijab and that's not comfortable. There's all kinds of moments where someone can feel included or excluded. And some of them you blow off. I don't eat pork. So when I go and there's a bacon bar, I can go, okay, I'm not going to go to the bacon bar. I don't feel excluded. But another more, severe example might be like, if you're a recovering alcoholic and every event has a beer, open bar, right? That's what we mean, right? When we say spaces?
That's exactly. I mean, you've hit it. You've hit the nail right on the head. And in the ways that this shows up in tech, I think the ways that I've seen it anyway, it would be, me being stopped constantly and asked to for folks to see my badge or
and you were there 6 years.
I was there 6 years. And so, and I even, for a part of that was based in a tiny office in Washington, DC, where folks should have known my face, but I was still constantly stopped and asked to show my badge, or, asked if I was going to be restocking the micro kitchen because they just made the assumption that I wasn't, or that I was working with the very wonderful Ruse team that handles like all of the logistics in our micro kitchens or whatever. So like it shows up in ways that I don't think folks know or understand that those are microaggressions, but that's the way that it shows up. It wasn't necessarily in some cases for my students that they disliked their team or that they disliked the project that they were working on, or they felt like, their manager didn't understand who they were as an HBCU grad. Like, no, my students never really said any of those things. For the most part, there were certain cases, yes, but for the most part, no. My students would say to me, hey, I continue to be stopped. Literally every few feet that I'm walking, I continue to be stopped and asked for my badge. Or when I'm coming into the office in the morning, like security has to like double check to make sure my LDAP is right. Like my username is right, whatever. So like those are the things that happen when I mean like spaces feeling exclusive and not protective or embracing for the students that I was working with and that I was bringing in.
Yeah. And as a hiring manager, and as people who are listening to the show that are hiring managers, there's a slider bar of inclusion that you can kind of like move to the, move towards inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
You can also go too far.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to overdo things. Like I've seen people in meetings where something awful, like a lot of the protests that we saw in some of the justice issues that occurred last year. And then if you call on in an all hands, the one Black engineer and ask their opinion without warning them, you are thinking well-meaning person. I just trying to give April space to say something. Yeah. People did not need that opportunity.
That's right.
And, those are all different moments for someone to feel like it's cool. I actually saw someone online yesterday tweet what they wanted from a job, and they had like salary and all the different things. And then the bottom was psychological safety.
Yeah.
And a lot of people of a certain age, myself included, might say, you just need to kind of suck it up. It's exhausting. Like it's like a background process in your brain, like a little CPU that's just using up 20% all the time. And you don't have that extra CPU to spare.
That's right. That's right. And to put that and to make that more like tangible for folks who might hear this, my job was to increase the technical pipeline from historically Black colleges and universities. More tangibly, that basically meant increase applications and support students so that they fared successfully through Google's interview process. But in addition to that, I found myself doing lots of other things that were not within my role description, that I was not being paid to do, that took me hours and hours and hours to execute and implement. And so it became something that did feel overwhelming and exhausting at times, and all in the vein of trying to make spaces inclusive and feel good for everybody involved. That to me is what I think about when I hear you, talk about the exhaustion piece and the psychological safety. Like I want to be able to do my job and do it well without having to feel responsible for so many of the other pieces that I know will impact the long-term trajectory of what it means to have a diverse, safe space within tech.
That is really important. And I really appreciate the way that you crystallized that at the end there, because ultimately we just want to work. We just want to do good work that is meaningful.
Yep.
And we want to do work with, people from all over that have got great ideas to make great products and do the right thing.
That's right.
What's our call to action at the end here for those who have made it all the way to the end of the podcast for us to think about? Where can we go and learn more about these things and educate ourselves?
Yeah, I love this. I like, folks, I would love for folks to walk away from this and just like go Google historically Black colleges and universities, or Bing, or whatever your preferred choice of search engine is. And just like start reading about all of the incredible work that's coming out of historically Black colleges. You'd be super surprised how many of your favorite folks on the planet come from HBCUs. And so I'd start there, A, and B, maybe if you're on social media, start following key players in this space and start seeing what the conversation is. Maybe don't insert yourself just yet into the conversation, but absolutely start following the narrative and better understanding what it is that, we're hoping to achieve by talking about these things. It's not to make anybody uncomfortable, and it's certainly not to, it's not to accuse anyone of anything, but it's absolutely to make sure that we have a tech space that is excellent and produces excellent products for all of its users. And so, yeah, I would highly recommend that you start getting into the social media conversations that are trickling up, I think, at this point, because now is the time to start talking about it. And if you exist in tech and you want to see a better tech, start having the conversation with folks like me, who have insight that maybe you've never actually heard before, or experienced before, and we can chat it out, because I'm a very nice person, I promise.
Well, I very much enjoyed talking with you, a very nice person. We've been chatting with April Curley today on another episode of Handsome Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.